The dense fog clung to the ancient pines of Yellowstone National Park like a shroud, muting the early morning calls of elk and the distant howl of wolves. Ranger Elias Thorne had patrolled these trails for over 2 decades, his boots wearing paths deeper than most visitors ever ventured. At 52, with salt and pepper hair hidden under his wide-brimmed hat and a face etched by wind and worry, Elias was the kind of man who spoke more to the animals than to people. His cabin sat on the edge of the Lamar Valley, a modest A-frame with solar panels and a wood stove, far from the tourist hubs, but close enough to respond when nature, or human folly, demanded it. That crisp October dawn, Elias was nursing a pot of black coffee on his porch, the steam rising like ghosts in the chill air. The park was winding down from summer crowds, but reports of poachers had trickled in from the east boundary. Illegal trapping, they said. Trappers crossing from Montana, chasing big game for black market hides. Elias dismissed it as rumor at first. He'd chased shadows before, but as the sun pierced the mist, casting golden shafts across the dew-kissed grass, a faint rustling from the tree line caught his ear. Not the usual deer or bear, something smaller, more desperate. He set his mug down and grabbed his binoculars, scanning the underbrush. There, emerging from the shadows, was a sight that froze him in place. A tiger cub, no more than 6 months old by the look of its stubby legs and oversized paws, stumbled into the clearing. Its orange fur was matted and dull, ribs protruding like the bars of a cage beneath its skin. The cub's eyes, wide and amber, locked onto Elias with a mix of fear and raw hunger. It let out a weak mewl, more whimper than roar, and then, impossibly, it approached the cabin steps. With a clumsy paw, it scratched at the weathered wooden door, the sound echoing like a plea in the silence. Elias's heart pounded. Tigers in Yellowstone? It didn't make sense. The park's predators were grizzlies and wolves, not striped ghosts from the jungles of Asia. This had to be an escapee, maybe from some roadside zoo or a private collector gone wrong. He'd heard whispers of exotic animal smuggling rings operating out of Billings, traffickers hiding big cats in trailers bound for underground auctions. But seeing it here, starving and alone, hit him like a gut punch. The cub scratched again, weaker this time, its body trembling from exhaustion. Before the story goes deeper, make sure to subscribe for more narratives like this. Elias moved slowly, his ranger training kicking in. Never startle a wild animal, especially one cornered by its own desperation. He eased the door open just a crack, enough to slip inside and grab a hunk of venison from the fridge, leftovers from a hunter's donation. Back on the porch, he tossed it gently toward the cub, who pounced with frantic energy, tearing into the meat as if it were the last meal on earth. Elias watched, phone in hand. Already dialing the park's emergency line. "This is Thorne at Lamar Outpost," he said, voice steady despite the adrenaline. "Got a situation. Tiger cub on my doorstep." "Yeah, you heard that right. Send backup and notify Fish and Wildlife." As the cub devoured the food, Elias noticed the collar around its neck. Faded leather, embedded with a GPS tag that looked homemade, wires frayed and dangling. No microchip scanner in his kit. But he could tell this wasn't a sanctuary animal. The poor thing had been through hell. Scars crisscrossed its flanks, likely from fights or rough handling. He kept his distance, murmuring soft reassurances in the way he did with injured wolves. "Easy there, kid. You're safe now." Word spread fast through the ranger network. By noon, a team from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service arrived in unmarked SUVs, their faces a mix of disbelief and urgency. Dr. Lena Vasquez, a wildlife vet from Bozeman, knelt beside the cub with a tranquilizer dart at the ready. "How the hell did this get here?" she muttered, her gloved hands gently examining the animal as it dozed off from the sedative. Elias recounted the morning, pointing out the tree line where the cub had appeared. Tracks led back into the brush, small paw prints mingled with larger boot marks, human ones. The team set up cameras immediately, motion-activated trail cams borrowed from the park's inventory. They positioned them around the cabin and along the path the cub had taken, hoping to catch whatever or whoever had driven it here. Elias felt a knot in his stomach. This wasn't just a rescue. It smelled like trouble. the kind that could unravel lives. As the sun dipped low, painting the valley in hues of amber and crimson, the first footage came in. Grainy at dusk, but clear enough. The cub, weaving through the trees, pausing to sniff the air. Then, shadows, 2 figures, hooded and hurried, shoving the cub from a battered pickup truck before speeding off into the twilight. Elias replayed the clip on his laptop, the glow illuminating his tense features. The truck's plates were obscured by mud, but the silhouettes were unmistakable. Men, one with a rifle slung over his shoulder. Poachers, smugglers dumping evidence. The cub had been a liability, too weak to sell, too noisy to keep. Rage simmered in Elias's chest. This wasn't nature's cruelty, it was man's. He forwarded the video to the feds, knowing it was just the beginning. Night fell heavy over the cabin. The cub now crated in a borrowed trailer, on its way to a rehab center in Jackson Hole. Elias sat by the fire, the scratch at his door echoing in his mind. Sleep wouldn't come easy. Little did he know. The cameras were still rolling, capturing secrets that would soon grip the nation. In the quiet hours, another shape flickered on the feed, a lone figure circling the tree line, watching, waiting. The world was about to learn just how deep this rabbit hole went. The first light of dawn filtered through the cabin windows, casting long shadows across the worn oak floorboards. Elias Thorne hadn't slept more than a couple of hours, his mind replaying the grainy footage from the trail cams like a looped nightmare. The cub was gone now, whisked away to the rehab facility under Dr. Vasquez's watchful eye, but the weight of what it represented lingered heavier than the October chill. He brewed another pot of coffee, black and strong, and stepped out onto the porch, scanning the tree line where the cameras hummed silently in the underbrush. The park was stirring awake. Coyotes yipping in the distance, a flock of ravens scattering from the pines like black confetti. Elias checked his phone. Messages from the Fish and Wildlife team confirming the cub's stable condition, its vitals weak but holding. They'd named it temporarily, Stripe, for the bold markings that still peeked through the grime. But Elias knew names were just a human habit. This was no ordinary rescue. The feds had looped in the FBI's wildlife trafficking unit, and by mid-morning Special Agent Marcus Hale arrived, a wiry man in his 40s with a buzz cut and eyes that missed nothing. He shook Elias's hand firmly, his grip like iron. "Thorne, right. Seen your reports. This cub's a gold mine, or a bombshell, depending on how you look at it." Hale sat up at the kitchen table, his laptop open to the footage. They watched it again together, frame by frame. The pickup truck, a faded Ford F-150 with Montana plates caked in mud, idled at the forest's edge. 2 men, stocky builds, faces obscured by hoodies, hauled the crated cub from the bed, shoving it unceremoniously into the brush. One muttered something inaudible, the other laughed, a harsh bark that carried on the wind. Then they were gone, tires spinning gravel as they vanished down a service road. Elias pointed to the timestamp. Dropped it around 4 a.m., like they knew patrols were light then. Hale nodded, zooming in on the rifle strap visible on the second man's shoulder. Poachers, most likely. But tigers, that's exotic pet trade territory. We've had tips about a ring out of Billings, guys importing from Asia, breeding them in backwoods setups. Sell to rich folks who want a status symbol until the thing grows claws and teeth. The conversation turned to the lone figure from the overnight feed. Elias pulled up the clip, a shadowy form, taller than the others, moving with deliberate caution along the tree line. No vehicle this time, just on foot, pausing to peer toward the cabin before melting back into the trees. Hale's brow furrowed. "Scout, or someone cleaning up loose ends? We need more cams out there." They spent the next hour repositioning the devices, stringing infrared ones deeper into the woods, along animal trails and hidden clearings. Elias's hands were steady, but his mind raced. 20 years in the park, and he'd seen black bears orphaned by hunters, wolves snared for bounties, but this felt personal, a violation of the wild he protected. By afternoon, the team expanded. A couple of local rangers, Tom Riley and Sarah Klein, joined from the headquarters in Mammoth, bringing drones for aerial sweeps. Sarah, A sharp-eyed woman in her 30s with a ponytail and a no-nonsense demeanor quizzed Elias on the cub's behavior. It knocked? Like intentionally? He nodded, describing the scratch, the pleading eyes. Starved half to death. Must have smelled the food from a mile off. Broke my heart. Tom clapped him on the back. You're a softy under that grisly exterior, Thorne. As the sun climbed higher, painting the Lamar Valley in golden light, the group fanned out. Elias led Hale along the path the cub had staggered down, boot prints still visible in the soft earth. Size 10, maybe, with a distinctive tread from hunting boots. They found drag marks, too, faint but telling, where the crate had been hauled. Deeper in, amid a thicket of lodgepole pines, they stumbled on a discarded water bottle, half buried in leaves. Hale bagged it carefully. DNA, if we're lucky. Prints on the plastic. Back at the cabin, tension simmered as they monitored the feeds in real time. Elias paced the porch, the scent of pine sap and damp earth filling his lungs. He thought of his own daughter, Mia, away at college in Bozeman. How she'd love this story, or hate it, depending on the danger. She'd always teased him about talking to the animals more than people, but now he wondered if that solitude had left him blind to the threats creeping closer. Then, around 3 p.m., the first real hit came. One of the new cams, tucked near a dry creek bed, captured movement. Not the Scout this time, but something bigger. A low rumble echoed through the speakers as a second truck, this one a rusted Chevy Silverado, pulled up to the same spot. 2 men emerged, the same builds from the night before, but now in daylight, their faces partially visible under baseball caps. The driver, broad-shouldered with a scruffy beard, scanned the area nervously while the passenger, slimmer with tattoos snaking up his neck, rummaged in the bed. Elias leaned in, heart thudding. That's them. Hale hit record, his voice low. Easy, let it play. The men argued briefly, words carrying faintly. Cub's gone. Boss is pissed. The tattooed one kicked at the dirt. We dump the gear and bolt. No traces. They unloaded a tarp-wrapped bundle, something heavy that thudded to the ground. Tools, maybe, wire snares. A tranquilizer gun, vials glinting in the light. But then the passenger froze, sniffing the air like a hound. He pointed toward the cabin's direction. Tracks. Someone's been here. Panic flashed across their faces. The driver yanked a pistol from his waistband. Not a hunting rifle, but a compact 9mm. They scanned the trees, voices rising in hushed urgency. We gotta check the drop site. If the ranger saw... The tattooed man shook his head. Forget it. Burn it all. They doused the bundle with what looked like lighter fluid from a can, striking a match. Flames licked up quickly, black smoke curling into the sky like a signal flare. Elias's fists clenched. They're destroying evidence. Hale was already on the radio, coordinating with a response team from Gardner. We move now, or they scatter. But as the men piled back into the truck, tires screeching, another figure emerged from the opposite tree line, the Scout from the night before. This time, clearer. A woman, mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back and a backpack slung low. She didn't approach the fire. Instead, she watched the truck peel away, then knelt by the smoldering pile, salvaging something small, a singed notebook perhaps, before vanishing into the brush. The cabin fell silent as the feed looped. Elias stared at the screen, the acrid scent of imagined smoke in his nostrils. Who was she? Accomplice or adversary? The cameras had caught it all, the desperation, the violence, the fleeting glimpse of humanity in the chaos. Hale closed his laptop with a snap. This just went federal. Big time. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the distant crackle of that fire. Elias knew the park's secrets were unraveling, thread by thread, and he was right in the middle. The world might not be silenced yet, but the truth was burning brighter than any cover-up. The smoke from the burning bundle hung in the air like a guilty confession, drifting eastward toward the Lamar River as the response team from Gardner mobilized. Elias Thorne stood on the cabin porch, his breath visible in the cooling afternoon air, watching the drone footage Hale replayed on a tablet. The woman's face was partially obscured by the brim of her hat. but her movements were precise, almost professional. No fumbling, no panic. She pocketed the notebook with a quick glance over her shoulder, then slipped away like a shadow dissolving into the pines. Elias rubbed his stubbled chin, the scratch of it grounding him amid the whirlwind. Special Agent Marcus Hale paced the gravel driveway, phone pressed to his ear, coordinating with a tactical unit en route. Yeah, 2 suspects in a Silverado, heading north on the 89. Get eyes on the border crossings. He hung up and turned to Elias, his expression a mask of calculated calm. That fire was sloppy. They'll leave a trail. Tires, ash, whatever she salvaged. But we need to lock this down before dark. No more surprises. Sarah Klein and Tom Riley returned from the creek bed, their faces smudged with dirt from sifting the remnants of the blaze. Sarah held up a charred metal tag, dangling from a chain. From a collar, looks like. Matches the one on the Cub. Same cheap engraving. Property of Apex Exotics. Tom nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. Found tranq darts, too, empty ones. They were dosing it to keep it quiet during transport. The group gathered around the kitchen table, the scent of scorched earth clinging to their clothes. Elias poured coffee for everyone, the routine act a brief anchor in the storm. As the sun began its descent, casting elongated shadows across the valley floor, the tactical team arrived. 4 agents in tactical vests, their SUVs kicking up dust. They secured the perimeter, stringing yellow tape around the burn site and posting sentries at key vantage points. Elias felt the shift. His quiet outpost had become a crime scene, the wild interrupted by flashing lights and radio chatter. Dr. Vasquez called in from Jackson Hole, her voice crackling over speakerphone. Stripe's eating on its own now. IV fluids did the trick, but scans show old fractures in the legs. This cub's been caged too long, bounced around like cargo. Hale traced a finger over a map spread across the table, marking the drop site and the truck's likely route. Billings is the hub. We've got a warrant brewing for a warehouse on the outskirts. Tips say it's a front for breeding ops. Tigers, lions, even hyenas. Buyers fly in from Vegas, pay top dollar for pets that end up as liabilities. Elias leaned in, studying the red pins. He'd driven through Billings once on a supply run, never imagining the underbelly festering there. And the woman? She didn't torch anything. Saved it. Undercover. Hale shook his head. Or a rival. These rings fracture. Infighting over shipments. Could be she's got her own agenda. The agent's eyes met Elias's, a silent acknowledgement of the risks. You stay sharp tonight. If they're circling back, your cabin's ground zero. Dusk settled like a velvet curtain, the first stars pricking the indigo sky. Elias volunteered for the night watch, positioning himself in a blind near the tree line with a pair of night vision binoculars. The park's nocturnal symphony played on, owls hooting, leaves rustling in the breeze, but an unnatural tension hummed beneath it. He thought of Mia again, her last call home complaining about midterms. Dad, you're out there playing hero with bears. Stay safe. If only she knew. The radio crackled softly, Hale's team sweeping the access roads, no sign of the Silverado yet. Around 10 p.m., the cams pinged again. Elias's heart skipped as he tuned into the feed from the deepest unit near an old logging trail. The woman reappeared, moving with the same ghost-like grace, her backpack heavier now. She knelt at the burn site's edge, sifting through cooled ash with gloved hands. The infrared painted her in ghostly green, methodical, unhurried. She pulled something free, a small vial, intact amid the debris, labeled in faded ink. Tucking it away, she scanned the horizon, her posture alert. Then, impossibly, she turned directly toward Elias's blind, as if sensing eyes on her. He held his breath, finger hovering over the radio. But she didn't advance. Instead, she left a marker, a flat stone balanced on a stump, etched with a symbol, a crude tiger's head, a warning, a breadcrumb. Elias waited until her form faded into the night before signaling the team. They converged quietly, Hale bagging the stone while forensics lit the site with floodlights. Not random, Hale murmured, examining the carving under a magnifier. Gang tag, maybe, or a signature. Back at the cabin, the group debriefed by lantern light, the fire in the hearth casting flickering shadows on the log walls. Sarah brewed tea, chamomile, to ease the nerves, and passed mugs around. Tom cracked a grim joke. "Next they'll dump a elephant on your porch, Thorn." Laughter rippled, brief and brittle. Elias stared into the flames, the cub's weak scratch echoing in his memory. This wasn't just about one animal anymore. It was a web, spun from greed and secrecy, threatening the fragile balance of the park he called home. As midnight approached, Hale's phone buzzed with a breakthrough. The Silverado had been spotted at a gas station in Livingston, the bearded driver buying smokes with a credit card traced to a false name. "We're closing in," Hale said, a rare spark of triumph in his voice. But Elias's unease deepened. The woman, the symbol, they hinted at layers yet to peel. Outside, the wind howled through the passes, carrying whispers of pursuit. The cameras kept watch, silent sentinels in the dark, capturing fragments of a story that was far from over. In the heart of Yellowstone, where nature ruled, human shadows loomed larger than ever, and Elias Thorn found himself entangled in their chase. The first hints of dawn crept over the Lamar Valley, turning the frost-kissed meadows into a mosaic of silver and gold. Elias Thorn trudged back to his cabin after a long night in the blind, his muscles aching from the cold and the vigilance. The stone marker with its etched tiger head sat on the kitchen table under a harsh lamp, its rough lines staring back like an accusation. Special Agent Marcus Hale hadn't slept either. He nursed a mug of reheated coffee, his eyes bloodshot but sharp as he pored over satellite maps on his laptop. The tactical team had pulled back to a staging area in Gardner for refueling, leaving the outpost feeling exposed, the quiet amplified by the absence of their radios. Elias sank into a chair, the wooden creak echoing his fatigue. "That symbol means anything to you?" Hale glanced up, rubbing his temples. "Not yet. Running it through databases. Could be a poacher's brand or something from the exotic trade. Tigers fetch a fortune on the black market. Syndicates mark their stock like cattle." The agent's words hung heavy, turning the cub's plight into a commodity, stripped of its wild dignity. Elias thought of Stripe, safe in Jackson Hole but forever scarred, its trust in humans shattered before it could roar. He'd seen enough orphaned wildlife to know recovery was a long shot. Physical wounds healed, but the fear lingered like a shadow. Sarah Klein burst through the door around 7 a.m., her boots caked in mud from an early patrol. "Got a hit on the Silverado. State troopers pulled it over outside Billings. Driver's in custody." But the passenger bolted into some back alleys. She dropped a file folder on the table, photos spilling out. The bearded man, now identified as Roy Harlan, a 45-year-old ex-con with priors for animal cruelty and fencing stolen goods. His rap sheet painted a picture of a man scraping by on the fringes, unemployed mill worker turned petty hustler, easy prey for smuggling rings promising quick cash. "He's lawyering up, but we squeezed a name. Apex Exotics, warehouse on the east side, disguised as a vet supply depot." Hale's face lit up with grim satisfaction. "That's our warrant target. FBI's moving in at noon. SWAT, the works." He stood, stretching his wiry frame. "Thorn, you and Klein hold the fort here. More cams if you can. We don't want that woman slipping through." Elias nodded, but unease gnawed at him. The park felt smaller now, its vastness closing in with threats from the outside world. He grabbed his pack and headed out with Sarah, the crisp air biting at his cheeks as they hiked deeper into the tree line. The burn site's ashes were cold, scattered by wind, but they planted new sensors, tiny solar-powered units camouflaged in bark and foliage, their lenses trained on every approach. By mid-morning, the cabin buzzed with activity. Tom Riley arrived with sandwiches from the ranger station, his usual easy grin tempered by the stakes. "Heard Harlan singing like a bird already. Says the cub came in from a shipment out of Seattle. Container ship rerouted through Vancouver. Tigers crated like furniture." They ate in shifts. The group clustered around the monitors, the scent of turkey and mustard a mundane counterpoint to the tension. Elias chewed mechanically, his mind drifting to the cub's amber eyes, pleading at his door. How many others had been discarded like trash, their lives traded for profit in boardrooms far from the wild? The breakthrough came just after lunch as Elias monitored the feeds from the porch. A ping from the newest cam, positioned near the old logging trail, showed movement, subtle at first, a rustle in the underbrush. He called the others over, and they watched in stunned silence as the woman emerged again, this time in broad daylight. She wore a faded denim jacket over cargo pants, her dark hair tied in a loose braid that swung as she moved. No hood this time. Her face was clear, angular features marked by a faint scar along her jawline. Mid-30s, Elias guessed, with the lean build of someone who lived outdoors. Hiker, perhaps, or hunter. But her eyes, even through the grainy feed, burned with purpose. She approached the burn site cautiously, kneeling to trace the ground where the stone had been. Her lips moved, mouthing words, maybe cursing the removal. Then she straightened, scanning the trees with a practiced sweep as if she knew the woods held watchers. Elias's pulse quickened. She was no amateur. She pulled a small device from her pack, a handheld scanner like the ones vets used for microchips, and swept it over the area, frowning at the lack of signal. Whatever she sought, it wasn't there. Frustration etched her brow as she jotted notes in a worn journal, the same one glimpsed before, perhaps. Hale radioed from the road, his voice cutting through. "Eyes on the warehouse, perimeter secure. Harlan's intel checks out. We've got holding pens in the back." But Elias barely heard, transfixed as the woman paused, head tilting toward the cabin. She slipped a folded paper from her pocket and wedged it under a rock at the site's edge. A message. Before she could retreat, Sarah whispered, "She's leaving something. We move?" Elias shook his head. "Wait, let her go. Trap the note." The woman lingered a moment longer, her gaze lingering on the distant outline of the cabin, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. Regret, maybe, or resolve. Then she was gone, melting into the pines with the fluidity of a deer. The team waited 10 agonizing minutes before converging. Elias approached first, gloved hands retrieving the paper. Unfolding it revealed a hand-scrawled map. Crude lines marking routes from Billings to the park's east boundary, circled spots for drops. And at the bottom, in block letters, "Cub alive. Meet at Raven's Perch, midnight. J. J for what? Accomplice turned whistleblower?" Elias's mind raced. Raven's Perch was a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, a spot he'd patrolled 100 times. Isolated, defensible, but risky in the dark. Hale's voice crackled over the radio. "Copy that. We're wrapping the raid. Found 3 more cubs. Emaciated but breathing. This J might be the inside line we need." Excitement rippled through the group, but Elias felt the weight of it. Trusting a shadow in the woods could unravel everything, or end in ambush. As the afternoon waned, the sun dipping behind the Absaroka peaks in a blaze of orange, Elias prepared for the meet. He checked his sidearm, a standard-issue Glock issued for bear country, though it felt heavier now. Sarah and Tom would provide cover from hidden vantage points, Hale's team looping back post-raid. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now hummed with strategy, radios tuned low, night vision goggles charged. Elias stepped outside, the cooling air carrying the earthy tang of impending rain. He thought of the tiger cub's scratch, a desperate bid for survival that had ignited this chain. What secrets would midnight reveal? The cameras whirred softly, eternal witnesses to the unfolding drama, as Yellowstone's guardian braced for the night's revelations. The line between protector and prey had blurred, and in the gathering dusk, Elias Thorne wondered if he was ready to cross it. The moon hung low over Raven's Perch like a watchful eye, its pale light filtering through scattered clouds and casting jagged shadows across the rocky outcrop. Elias Thorne crouched behind a cluster of boulders, the chill seeping through his insulated jacket as he scanned the valley below. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying the faint metallic tang of rain on the horizon. Midnight had come and gone by 10 minutes, and the silence stretched taut, broken only by the occasional rustle of night creatures. a porcupine shuffling in the underbrush, distant coyote yips echoing off the canyon walls. His radio was muted, clipped to his belt, but he could feel Sarah Klein's presence from her vantage 100 yards east, her scope trained on the approach trail. Tom Riley held the western flank, his breath steady over the comms earlier. "Clear here, Thorne. She's either ghosting us or walking into a trap." Elias's Glock rested heavy in its holster, a cold comfort against the uncertainty gnawing at him. The folded map from the burn site burned in his pocket, its ink smudged but legible, routes snaking from Billings through remote backroads, drop points marked with X's that hinted at a network far bigger than one discarded cub. Jay had to be the key, but trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. 20 years patrolling these wilds had taught him that shadows hid teeth. A soft crunch of gravel pulled his attention downward. There, emerging from the tree line like a specter, was the woman. She moved with the same deliberate grace, her braid swaying slightly as she climbed the faint path to the perch. No backpack this time, just a light jacket over jeans, hands visible and empty, though Elias knew better than to assume vulnerability. She paused midway, eyes sweeping the darkness, then continued until she stood at the outcrop's edge, overlooking the moonlit Lamar Valley. The river below gleamed like molten silver, a serene counterpoint to the tension coiling in Elias's chest. "You're early," she called softly, her voice carrying on the wind, low and edged with caution, laced with a faint southern drawl that placed her from somewhere east of the Mississippi. Not local, then. Elias weighed his options, the ranger in him urging patience, the protector demanding answers. He rose slowly from cover, hands open at his sides, the moonlight catching the silver badge on his chest. "Park Service. You left a note. Said something about a cub." She turned sharply, her posture tensing like a coiled spring, but she didn't bolt. Up close, in the dim light, her face resolved into sharp angles, high cheekbones, the scar along her jaw a thin white line against tanned skin. Mid-30s, Elias confirmed, with eyes that held a storm of weariness and defiance. "Stripe," she said, the name slipping out like a confession. "Is it alive?" Her gaze flicked over him, assessing, then softened fractionally. "I saw the cams. Knew you'd find it." Elias kept his distance, 10 feet separating them on the rocky ledge. "It's in rehab, eating, stable, but scarred, physically and otherwise. Who are you? And why the games?" She hesitated, glancing toward the valley as if expecting interruption, then pulled a small ID wallet from her pocket. Not a badge, but a worn business card. Jenna Reyes, freelance investigator, Wildlife Watch Network. Elias's brow furrowed. He'd heard of the group, a nonprofit digging into poaching and trafficking, often clashing with authorities over methods too aggressive for the rule book. "Jenna," he repeated, the initial clicking into place. "You were at the burn site, salvaging evidence while those idiots torched it." She nodded, a wry smile ghosting her lips. "Harlan and his crew, small-time muscle for Apex. I infiltrated 6 months ago, posing as a buyer. Got close enough to map their ops. But the cub, that was a botched transport. They were moving a litter from a breeder in Idaho, but it got sick en route. Too weak to auction, so they dumped it to cut losses." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, betraying the emotion she kept leashed. Elias saw it then. The toll of immersion, the way her hands trembled faintly, calloused from fieldwork but marked by the invisible scars of seeing too much cruelty. "Why not go straight to the feds?" he pressed, stepping closer, the gravel shifting under his boots. Jenna's eyes hardened. "Because Apex isn't just poachers. It's connected. Money laundering through fake sanctuaries, bribes to customs in Seattle ports. I had proof, shipment logs, buyer lists, even photos of the cages. But Harlan got suspicious, started tailing me, that notebook I grabbed. Names, dates, ties to bigger fish in Vegas and D.C. She paused, pulling a thumb drive from her jacket, holding it out like an olive branch. "This is everything. Hand it to your agent Hale. But there's more. A big shipment tomorrow night. Tigers and leopards crossing from Canada. If we hit it wrong, the whole ring scatters." Elias took the drive, its weight insignificant against the implications. Rain began to patter, light at first, then steady, drumming on the rocks and blurring the horizon. You're risking everything. Why me? A ranger in the middle of nowhere? Jenna met his gaze, rain streaking her face. Because you answered the door. That cub chose you, scratched like it knew you'd help. And your cams. They've already caught enough to bury Harlan. But this? She gestured to the valley, the park's vast expanse. This is ground zero. Dump sites like yours are how they launder the weak ones. Blame it on escapes to cover tracks. Thunder rumbled in the distance, vibrating through the stone. Elias's mind raced. Piecing it together, the scout's caution, the symbol as a signal, not a threat. Jenna wasn't the enemy. She was frayed at the edges, driven by a fire that mirrored his own quiet passion for the wild. All right, he said finally. We coordinate. Hale's raiding the warehouse now. 3 more cubs pulled out alive. But you come in, official. No more solo acts. She nodded, relief flickering in her eyes, but it was short-lived. Headlights pierced the rain-slicked road below, twin beams cutting through the downpour from the east boundary. They're here, Jenna whispered, urgency sharpening her tone. Scouts, checking drops after the fire. Elias keyed his radio, voice low. Klein, Riley, eyes on the road, 2 vehicles inbound. The response was immediate. Sarah's calm affirm. Copy, drones up. But as the truck slowed near the tree line, the same Silverado, plus a Jeep, figures spilled out, flashlights sweeping the brush. One called out, voice muffled by the storm. Jenna, you out here. Boss wants the logs, now! Panic flashed across her face. They tailed me. Go, get that drive to Hale. She shoved him toward cover, but Elias grabbed her arm. Not without you. Gunshots cracked the night, erratic pops echoing off the rocks. Not aimed yet, but warnings slicing through the rain. Elias pulled her down behind a boulder as bullets chipped stone nearby, the acrid scent of gunpowder mixing with wet earth. Heart-pounding, he returned fire, 2 controlled shots into the dark, enough to scatter them momentarily. Jenna drew a compact pistol from her waistband, her movements fluid, no stranger to the fray. The chase spilled down the slope, rain turning the path to mud, slipping and sliding toward the valley floor. Elias's boots pounded the earth, Jenna at his side, the drive clutched in his fist. Flashes from below lit the night. The team's response, Riley's voice barking coordinates. But in that frantic descent, Elias glimpsed the cost. Jenna's labored breaths, the way she winced from an old injury flaring in the wet cold. This wasn't just about tigers anymore. It was lives colliding in the storm, secrets spilling like the downpour. By the time they reached the cabin's perimeter, soaked and breathless, Hale's SUVs roared up the drive, lights blazing. The scouts fled into the woods, but not before the drones captured plates and faces, links in the chain. Elias handed over the drive, watching Hale's team swarm Jenna for statements, her exhaustion plain but resolve unbroken. As the rain eased to a drizzle, the first light of false dawn tinting the east, Elias leaned against the porch rail, the night's revelation settling like sediment. The cub's knock had opened a door to hell, but now, with Jenna's intel, they could slam it shut. Yet the park whispered warnings. More shadows lurked, and the hunt was far from over. The rain had tapered to a persistent mist by the time the tactical lights pierced the gloom around Elias Thorne's cabin, turning the dew-slicked pines into silhouettes of judgment. Jenna Reyes stood under the awning, her jacket dripping onto the porch boards, as Special Agent Marcus Hale's team encircled her with questions sharper than the night's bullets. Elias watched from the doorway, his own clothes clinging cold to his skin, the Glock now holstered but its weight still echoing in his arms. The drive she'd given him, small, unassuming, now hummed in Hale's possession, its digital contents promising to crack the Apex Exotics facade wide open. But the scout's escape into the woods left a bitter aftertaste, like the metallic tang of gunpowder lingering on his tongue. Hale pulled Elias aside near the SUVs, his buzz-cut head glistening under the floodlights. She checks out. Wildlife Watch has her on payroll, off-the-books ops. Risky, but her intel's gold. That drive? Shipment manifests? Wire transfers to offshore accounts. Ties Apex to a cartel out of Mexico, funneled through Canadian borders. The agent's voice was low, urgent, the exhaustion in his eyes mirroring Elias's own. Harlan's talking more now. Says the boss is Victor Kane, some real estate mogul in Vegas who fronts as a conservationist. Collects big cats-like trophies, then flips the excess to underground fights or overseas buyers. Elias nodded, the pieces slotting into a grim puzzle. Kane's name rang a vague bell, headlines about eco-donations masking something seedier, the kind of hypocrisy that soured Elias's stomach. Inside the cabin, the group reconvened around the kitchen table, steam rising from fresh mugs of coffee that Sarah Klein had brewed. Jenna sat at the end, towel drying her braid, her scar more pronounced in the warm lamplight. She looked smaller now, the adrenaline crash etching lines around her eyes, but her voice held steady as she laid out the map from her pocket, the one she'd left at the burn site, now annotated with fresh notes. Tomorrow's shipment, 4 tigers, 2 leopards, crated in a semi from Calgary. Crosses at Sweetgrass, then south on I-15 to Billings. Apex's warehouse is the handoff. Kane's men will divvy it up. If we hit the border wrong, they reroute everything. Tom Riley leaned forward, his sandwich forgotten. Drones and cams caught the scout's jeep, plates traced to a rental in Great Falls. Faces matched low-level Apex goons, but that gunfire. They knew you were meeting someone. Jenna. She met his gaze, unflinching. I slipped up, left a trail from the gas station. Kane's paranoid. He's got eyes everywhere. Informants in the ports, even rangers on payroll. The word hung like smoke, and Elias felt it pierce him. Corruption in the park. It wasn't impossible. He'd turned a blind eye to minor infractions before, hunters with accidental overlimits. But this, it tainted the badge on his chest. Hale paced, phone in hand. FBI's coordinating with Border Patrol. Ambush at the crossing, but quiet. No alerts. We'll loop in Canadian Mounties for backup. He glanced at Elias. Thorne, your cams here are still rolling. If those scouts circle back, we need eyes on the east boundary. Klein, Riley, scout the access roads at first light. Then the team dispersed with nods, the cabin emptying into the mist-shrouded night. Jenna lingered, accepting a dry shirt from Elias's drawer. Faded flannel that swallowed her frame. Thanks, she murmured, rolling up the sleeves. For not leaving me up there. Elias busied himself stoking the fire, the crackle filling the awkward quiet. Cub chose right, scratching that door. You think Stripe's the only one they've dumped? Jenna shook her head, sinking onto the worn couch. Dozens, probably. Weak links in the chain, sick, too young, or just inconvenient. They stage escapes to throw off trackers, blame it on activists or zoo breaks. Her voice softened, eyes distant. I got into this after a lion cub in Florida. Same story. Starved, collared, left for dead. Owner was some tech bro who thought it was exotic landscaping. I was a vet tech then, now. It's all I do. Elias saw the fracture there, the personal hook that kept her in the shadows. He thought of his own losses, Mia's mother gone too young to cancer, leaving him to raise a daughter amid the wild's indifference. Solitude had been his armor, but tonight it felt thin. Sleep came in fits. The couch too short for Jenna, the armchair a poor fit for Elias. Dawn broke gray and sodden, the valley floor shrouded in fog that muffled the elk bugles. By 8 a.m., the cabin thrummed with renewed purpose. Dr. Vasquez called from Jackson Hole, her update a small victory. Stripes gaining weight, playful even, batting at a toy. But the fractures, they'll need surgery. You're a hero, Thorne. That knock saved it. Elias smiled faintly, the warmth cutting through the chill. He imagined the cub's amber eyes, no longer pleading but curious, a spark of wildness reclaiming what humans had stolen. The team mobilized, Elias and Jenna heading to the east boundary in his Ranger truck, the wipers slapping rhythmically against the drizzle. They checked the cams along the service road, footage from the night showing the scout's jeep idling, men arguing before peeling out. One clip caught a partial face, gaunt, tattooed, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Kane's enforcer, Jenna said, zooming in. Goes by Razor, handles the dirty drops. If he's here, the shipment's on high alert. Elias gripped the wheel tighter. The park's curves familiar but treacherous now, every shadow a potential threat. Back at base, Hale radioed coordinates. The semi had crossed without incident, but chatter intercepted hinted at a detour, straight to Yellowstone's fringes, using old poacher trails to evade checkpoints. They're spooked, Hale said. Harlan must have cracked under pressure. Ambush point shifted to the northeast entrance. Adrenaline surged. Elias volunteered to lead a sweep, Jenna insisting on riding shotgun. I know their patterns, she argued, and Hale relented with a warning glance. As they rumbled toward the rendezvous, the mist lifting to reveal the snow-capped peaks, Elias felt the arc bending, from a Lone Ranger's quiet morning to this web of pursuit. Jenna's presence stirred something dormant, a reminder that protection wasn't solitary, but doubt lingered. Kane's reach, the scout's bullets, the cub's scars. The radio crackled with updates, drones spotting the semi's dust trail. Tension coiled like a spring. In the heart of the park, where geysers steamed and rivers carved canyons, human greed clashed with nature's raw pulse. Elias accelerated, the truck's engine growling defiance as the chase hurtled toward confrontation. The cameras, ever vigilant, captured the stakes rising, frame by unforgiving frame. The gravel crunched under the tires of Elias Thorne's Ranger truck as it crested the ridge overlooking the northeast entrance to Yellowstone, the engine's low rumble blending with the steady patter of lingering rain on the roof. Jenna Reyes gripped the door handle, her knuckles white, eyes fixed on the winding service road ahead where the semi's dust plume had been last reported. The mist had burned off, leaving the air crisp and sharp, scented with wet pine and the faint sulphurous whiff from distant geysers. Elias downshifted, navigating the tight curves with the ease of years spent mapping these trails, but his jaw was set tight, the weight of the Glock at his hip a constant reminder of how far this had spiraled from a simple rescue. 2 miles out, Jenna said, checking her phone's encrypted app linked to Hale's feeds. Her voice was steady, but Elias caught the tremor, the same one that had edged her words during their midnight talk at Raven's Perch. She'd shared fragments of her past then. A veterinary clinic in Atlanta shattered by a trafficking bust gone wrong, a partner lost to the trade's violence. It humanized her, turned the fierce investigator into someone carrying ghosts as heavy as his own. Drones confirmed the semi's slowing, pulling off onto the old fire road. Razor's Jeep is tailing it. Elias keyed the radio. Hale, we're in position. Visual on the detour. Static crackled before the agent's response. Affirmative. Border Patrol's sealing the 89, but they're using park backcountry to loop in. SWAT's en route. ETA 15. Hold and observe, Thorne. No heroics. Elias acknowledged with a clipped copy, but his foot eased off the brake. Observing felt like surrender. The cub's weak scratch still echoed in his mind, a call he couldn't ignore. Jenna shot him a look, understanding, laced with warning. He's right. We've got backup. Let them handle the takedown. They crested another rise, the truck dipping into a shallow valley where the fire road snaked through aspen groves, their leaves a golden blur in the late afternoon light. Elias killed the headlights, easing to a crawl behind a screen of boulders. Through the binoculars, the semi came into view, a weathered Peterbilt with Montana plates, its trailer humming as it idled near a concealed clearing. The driver, a burly man in a stained cap, hopped down and lit a cigarette, scanning the tree line with jittery eyes. Moments later, the Jeep rolled up, Razor emerging first, tall and gaunt, his neck tattoos glistening with sweat despite the chill. He barked orders, voice carrying faintly on the wind. Unload quick. Kane's chopper's inbound from Vegas. Wants the pick of the litter. Elias's stomach twisted. More cubs, more lives bartered like lumber. He handed the binoculars to Jenna, who zoomed in on the trailer's rear doors swinging open. Crates stacked high, muffled growls emanating from within, deep, rumbling threats from adults, interspersed with the pitiful mewls of the young. One leopard, its spotted coat dull through the bars, paced restlessly, amber eyes flashing defiance. At least 6, Jenna whispered, her face paling. They're sedated, but barely. If that semi tips. She trailed off, the implication clear. A crash in these woods would be a slaughter, bodies left for scavengers to claim. The radio buzzed again. Sarah Klein's voice, urgent from her overwatch. "Thorne, we've got movement on the cams. 2 more vehicles inbound from the east. Unmarked vans. Could be Kane's security." Elias swore under his breath, the net tightening. Razor directed his men to the crates, prying one open to reveal a tiger cub, no bigger than Stripe, its fur matted and eyes glazed from drugs. The handler jabbed it with a prod, eliciting a weak snarl before slamming the lid. Jenna's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Bastards. That's how they break them. Pain and isolation. Tension coiled as the unloading began, crates dragged toward a waiting flatbed for redistribution. Elias itched to move, but Hale's orders held until a crate slipped, tumbling sideways with a sickening crack. The latch gave way, and a young tiger, adolescent, fierce despite its frailty, burst free, bounding into the underbrush with a roar that shattered the valley's hush. Chaos erupted, men shouting, Razor firing a wild shot into the trees, the animal's orange form vanishing into the aspens like a flame extinguished. "Go," Jenna urged, already unbuckling. "It's loose. Could head toward the river. Draw tourists." Elias didn't hesitate, radioing the breach as they slipped from the truck, moving low and silent through the brush. The leopard's distant calls mixed with the cub's panicked yowls, a symphony of desperation that propelled them forward. Elias's boots sank into the mud, heart hammering as they paralleled the clearing. Up close, the operation's ugliness hit harder, empty tranq vials littering the ground, bloodstains on the crates from rough handling. One handler, spotting movement, swung a rifle their way, but Jenna's warning hiss sent Elias diving behind a log. Shots rang out, not at them, but from the ridge. Hale's SWAT team, arriving early, poured over the hill in a coordinated rush, vests gleaming under the fading sun. "FBI, hands up!" Marcus Hale's voice boomed, megaphone amplifying the command. The poachers scattered like roaches, Razor bolting for the jeep only to be tackled by Tom Riley, emerging from cover with cuffs ready. The driver of the semi raised his hands slowly, cigarette dropping from trembling lips, while the others dropped weapons in a clatter of metal. Elias and Jenna pushed toward the escaped tiger, its tracks fresh in the soft earth, padded prints veering toward a thicket near the Lamar's feeder streams. "Easy," Elias murmured, as if the animal could hear, his ranger instincts overriding the adrenaline. They found it cornered against a fallen log, sides heaving, a graze from the bullet marring its flank. Jenna knelt first, voice soft and coaxing, pulling a sedative dart from her pack, mild for relocation. The tiger's eyes locked on hers, wild but weary, before the dart found its mark. It slumped gently, and they radioed for the transport crate. As the team secured the scene, crates inventoried, poachers zip-tied, Hale approached, clapping Elias on the shoulder. "Clean up, thanks to your eyes. That drive from Reyes. It's dismantling Kane's empire. Raids in Vegas and Seattle already greenlit." But victory felt hollow amid the whimpers from the crates. Jenna stood beside Elias, wiping blood from her hands, her expression a mix of relief and sorrow. "Stripe's family," she said quietly. "We'll get them all rehabbed, but Kane, he's the head. Without him, this stops." Dusk fell swiftly, the valley's shadows lengthening as the last crates were loaded onto federal rigs. Elias lingered by the stream, the escaped tiger now crated and calm, its breaths evening out. The cameras, repositioned by Sarah, captured the mop-up. Evidence bagged, statements taken under the sweep of tactical lights. Yet in the quiet aftermath, Elias felt the emotional toll. The cub's knock had exposed a wound in the wild, one that greed had festered. Jenna joined him, offering a faint smile. "You did good, Ranger. Doors always open for the lost ones." As the convoy rumbled out, headlights cutting the twilight, Elias drove back to his cabin alone, the road's isolation a balm after the frenzy. Mia called then, her voice bright from Bozeman. "Dad, park news blowing up. Tiger stuff? You okay?" He chuckled, the first real laugh in days. "Better than okay, kid. Just another day in the valley." But hanging up, he glanced at the tree line, where unseen cams still watched. Kane's shadow loomed, the ring's tendrils reaching deeper. The world might learn of the Cubs' plea soon, silencing doubters with footage of the takedown. For Elias, though, the story was personal, a guardian's vow renewed in the face of man's cruelty. The night deepened, stars emerging like promises, as Yellowstone breathed on, resilient and raw. The cabin's porch light flickered on automatically as Elias Thorne pulled into the gravel drive, the engine's rumble dying to a hush that amplified the night's chorus. Crickets chirping in the underbrush, a lone owl's hoot drifting from the pines. It was past midnight, the adrenaline from the northeast entrance bust ebbing into a bone-deep weariness that settled in his shoulders like an unwelcome guest. He killed the headlights, the dashboard glow fading, and sat for a moment in the dark, the scent of damp earth and exhaust clinging to his jacket. Mia's call replayed in his mind, her laughter a rare spark amid the grit. But even that couldn't erase the images burned into his retinas. The escaped tiger's wild eyes, the clatter of crates, Jenna's blood-streaked hands as she helped load the animals. Inside, the fire had dwindled to embers, casting a ruddy glow across the oak floors. Elias shrugged off his coat, hanging it by the door where it dripped steadily onto the mat. The kitchen table still bore the scars of the day's chaos, coffee rings, scattered maps now obsolete with the semi-impounded. He poured a glass of water from the tap, the cold shock grounding him, and sank into the armchair by the hearth. Sleep tugged at him, but his thoughts raced ahead. Victor Kane, the puppet master Hale had named, his empire crumbling under the weight of Jenna's drive and the warehouse raids. 3 more tigers, 2 leopards, and a pair of orphaned wolf pups from a side operation, all en route to sanctuaries, their futures uncertain but alive. Stripe would have company soon, a makeshift pride pieced from the wreckage of greed. A knock at the door jolted him upright, sharp, insistent, not the hesitant scratch of a desperate cub, but the rap of authority. Elias's hand instinctively went to his holster before he remembered he'd left the Glock in the truck. He rose, peering through the peephole. Jenna Reyes, soaked from the mist, her flannel shirt rumpled from the night's exertions. He opened the door, the chill rushing in. "Couldn't stay away? Hale send you." She stepped inside without invitation, shaking water from her braid like a dog fresh from the river. "No. Personal. Needed to debrief. Off the record." Her eyes, shadowed by fatigue, scanned the room as if checking for eavesdroppers, then settled on him with a vulnerability that caught him off guard. Jenna pulled a chair, straddling it backward, arms draped over the backrest. "The bust was clean, but Kane's not done. I got a ping on my burner. His people are scrambling, pulling strings to bury the evidence. One of the handlers from the semi. He's family to a judge in Billings. Bail hearings already whispering." Elias stoked the fire, sparks dancing up the chimney as he added a log. The warmth spread slowly, mirroring the cautious thaw between them. Hale's got the drive. Manifests, transfers. It's airtight. Kane's conservation front page fodder by morning. He sat across from her, the wooden chair creaking under his weight. Jenna shook her head, pulling a crumpled photo from her pocket, a grainy printout from the warehouse raid, showing a sleek office tucked behind the pens. Polished desk, walls lined with mounted heads of exotic cats, and in the center, a silver-haired man in a tailored suit, Victor Kane himself, smiling for a donor plaque. "That's the hook," she said, sliding it across the table. "Kane doesn't just collect, he owns the narrative. Funds Save the Tiger campaigns while shipping them in like contraband. That photo, from a hidden server, ties him to the Seattle port bribes. But he's got alibis lined up. Flights to Africa for eco-tours." Her voice cracked on the last word, frustration bleeding through. Elias studied the image, Kane's eyes cold and calculating, a far cry from the desperate warmth in Stripe's gaze. It stirred something paternal in him, a fierce protectiveness for the wild he'd guarded alone for so long. "Why tell me? You're the investigator." Elias met her gaze, seeing the cracks in her armor, the way her fingers drummed the table, betraying the adrenaline crash. Jenna leaned forward, elbows on knees, Because you're clean. No agenda, just the park. And that cub. It reminded me why I started this. Lost my brother to a poacher's bullet in the Everglades. Thought he was just a gator hunter, but it was a cover for ivory runs. I swore I'd tear it down, one ring at a time. But Apex? It's bigger. Kane's got politicians in his pocket. If he walks, the shipments restart. The fire popped, sending an ember skittering across the hearth. Elias felt the pull of her story, mirroring his own quiet losses. The wife who'd left the wilds for city lights. Mia's childhood summers spent chasing fireflies while he patrolled. Isolation had been his choice, but now it felt like a cage. "What do you need?" he asked, the words committing him before his mind caught up. Jenna's shoulders eased fractionally. "A witness. Kane's calling a press conference tomorrow in Vegas. Tragic misunderstanding spin. Hale's pushing for extradition, but we need boots on the ground here. Those cams of yours, keep them rolling on the east boundary. If Kane's enforcers come sniffing, Razor's crew, they'll hit your outpost first. And Stripe. If they want leverage, the rehab center's vulnerable." Elias nodded, the plan solidifying like frost on the windows. He stood, fetching a blanket from the hall closet and draping it over her shoulders. "Couch is yours. I'll take the porch watch," she protested weakly, but exhaustion won. Her eyes fluttered shut as he stepped outside, the door clicking softly behind him. The mist had thickened into a light fog, veiling the tree line where the cameras blinked red in the dark. He settled into a rocker, binoculars at hand, the night's chill seeping through his shirt. Mia's voice echoed again. "Stay safe, Dad." And he wondered what she'd think of this unlikely alliance. A ranger and a rogue investigator bound by a tiger's plea. Hours slipped by, the valley's rhythm unbroken save for a distant engine growl. Too far to pinpoint, but enough to tighten his grip on the radio. Hale checked in at 3 a.m. Voice gravelly. "Kane's holed up. Feds raiding his estate at dawn. Your footage from the bust? It's viral already. CNN's calling it the cub that roared." Elias chuckled softly, but the humor faded as headlights pierced the fog, slow and deliberate, approaching from the service road. Not federal, these were low beams, creeping like predators. His pulse quickened. Kane's retaliation? Or loose ends tying off? He keyed the radio silently, alerting Jenna inside. The vehicle, a black SUV, unmarked, halted at the tree line, doors opening to spill two figures into the mist. Flashlights swept the brush, voices low and urgent. "Burn the cams. Boss says no traces." Elias's blood ran cold. They were here for the evidence, the digital eyes that had exposed them. He slipped into the shadows, heart pounding as the intruders advanced. The night, once a sanctuary, now bristled with threat, the cub's legacy hanging by a thread. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a storm brewing, mirroring the one about to break over Kane's crumbling world. Elias moved like the ranger he was, silent and sure, ready to defend the wild that had knocked on his door. The fog clung to the tree line like a conspirator's whisper, muting the crunch of boots on damp leaves as the two figures advanced toward Elias Thorne's cabin. He pressed himself against the rough bark of a lodgepole pine, the wood's resinous scent sharp in his nostrils, heart steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. 20 years in Yellowstone had honed his senses to the night's subtle cues. The way the mist swirled around flashlight beams, the faint metallic click of a suppressor being attached to a pistol. These weren't amateurs. Kane's cleanup crew, no doubt, sent to erase the digital trail that could bury their boss. Inside, Jenna Reyes stirred on the couch, her instincts kicking in before Elias could signal. The radio's vibration on the side table buzzed her awake, and she slipped to the window, peering through the curtain's edge. The intruders were methodical. One scanned the underbrush with a handheld detector, hunting for the cam's infrared signatures, while the other covered him, pistol low and ready. "Grid the east side first," the spotter hissed, his voice gravelly with a Midwestern twang. "Boss said no loose ends. Those ranger eyes caught the whole show." Elias's mind raced, calculating angles. The nearest cam was 50 yards out, camouflaged in a shrub, its feed streaming live to Hale's secure server. If they took it down, the chain of evidence weakened, just a little, but enough for Kane's lawyers to exploit. He edged left, circling wide to flank them, the cold mud sucking at his boots. Rain from earlier had left the ground treacherous, but it also masked his approach. Jenna's silhouette moved in the cabin. She was arming herself, the compact pistol from Raven's perch glinting in the firelight. No time for backup. Hale's team was hours out, tied up in Vegas with Kane's dawn raid. The spotter knelt near the first device, a small black box wired to a solar panel, and yanked it free with a triumphant grunt. Got one, wiping the card. His partner nodded, sweeping the beam toward the cabin. That's when Elias struck. He lunged from the shadows, tackling the spotter from behind in a blur of motion, the man's detector flying into the brush. They hit the ground hard, Elias's forearm pinning the intruder's neck as fists flew, a wild punch grazing his jaw, stars exploding in his vision. "Park Service, drop it," Elias growled. But the man bucked, elbow slamming into his ribs with a crack of pain. Gunfire shattered the quiet, a suppressed pop from the partner, the bullet whizzing past Elias's ear and splintering bark. Jenna burst from the door, returning fire with controlled bursts that forced the shooter to dive behind a stump. "Elias, flank him!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos like a lifeline. He rolled off the spotter, who scrambled for his dropped pistol. But Elias was faster, kicking it away into the fog before driving a knee into the man's gut. The intruder gasped, doubling over, and Elias zip-tied his wrists with the flex cuffs from his belt, the plastic biting into flesh. The partner fired again, wild now, bullets chewing divots in the dirt near Jenna's feet. She ducked behind the porch rail, popping up to tag his shoulder with a grazing shot that spun him. He yelped, clutching the wound, blood dark against his jacket, and bolted for the SUV, tires spinning gravel as he fled into the night. Elias hauled the captive to his feet, shoving him toward the cabin steps. "Who sent you? Kane?" The man spat blood, eyes defiant but flickering with fear. "Screw you, Ranger. You're dead when he walks." Jenna approached, pistol lowered but steady, her face a mask of grim resolve. She cuffed the man's ankles for good measure, then retrieved the damaged cam. Its memory card intact, Hale would confirm later. "He's singing by morning," she said, voice low as she radioed the incident. Elias nodded, the ache in his ribs a dull throb, but relief washed over him like the fog lifting at dawn. The cabin stood untouched, a beacon in the gray, its walls holding the echoes of the cub's plea. By sunrise, the valley awoke in hues of pink and gold, the Lamar River murmuring below as federal agents swarmed the outpost. The captive, identified as Eddie Voss, a Kane enforcer with a rap sheet longer than the Yellowstone River, spilled details under interrogation. Kane's contingency plans, hidden caches of trank gear along the border, even a list of bribed officials. Hale arrived by chopper, his face etched with the night's triumphs. Vegas raid hit pay dirt. Kane in cuffs, his sanctuary exposed as a breeding mill. Your cam sealed it, Thorne. The footage from the bust? It's everywhere. News crews at the gates already. Jenna stood beside Elias on the porch, nursing a mug of coffee, the steam curling like the mist that had saved them. Stripe and the rescued animals were thriving in Jackson Hole, Dr. Vasquez reported. The adolescent tiger from the escape already pacing stronger, its wounds bandaged but spirit unbroken. "We did it," Jenna said softly, her scar catching the light. One knock, and the whole damn ring crumbles. Elias glanced at her, seeing not just the investigator, but a partner forged in the wild's unforgiving forge. Mia would meet her soon, he thought. Two women who'd fight for what mattered. As the agents packed up, the park reclaiming its rhythm with elk calls and raven cries, Elias felt the arc close. The cub's desperate scratch had silenced the world, not with shock alone, but with truth. Greed's shadows couldn't outrun the light of those who answered the call. Yellowstone endured, vast and vigilant, its secrets traded for justice. Hale clapped Elias on the back before boarding the chopper. "Retire? Nah, we need more doors like yours open." The rotors whirred to life, dust swirling, and Elias watched them fade into the sky. Jenna lingered, her hand brushing his. a quiet promise of more hunts ahead. The cabin door stood ajar, inviting whatever came next, but for now, peace settled like morning dew. The cameras, repaired and repositioned, blinked on, eternal guardians of the wild. Leave a comment sharing what you thought about this story.